hopefully. Good evening, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation History number 58. And I'm happy to say I'm going to be joined by Mitch this evening. I don't know if we're going to get any other guests. And we're going to be talking about Admiral George Anson, and in particular about his round-the-world cruise of 4 years when he captured the Spanish Treasure Galleon, which is probably the single richest prize money capture in Royal Navy history, and we'll be talking about that. Even the ordinary sailors on HMS Centurion, the ordinary seaman got 20 years pay in prize money. But anyway, we'll be talking about that as well. But to give people time to join the stream, as always, I'm going to start us off with a tune.
Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness on flooded folk and wall. Your new gods sullen peoples have devil and have child. Take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror and check the show of pride. By open speech and simple, 100 times made vain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, what's love that heed and folly, bring all your hopes to naught. Take up the white man's burden, no tawdry rule of kings, but toil of serf and sweeper, the tale of common things. The ports ye shall not enter, the roads ye shall not tread. Go make them with your living and mark them with your dead. Take up the white man's burden and reap his old reward. The blame of those ye better, the hate of those ye guard. The cry of those ye humor are slowly towards the light. Why brought ye us from bondage, a loved Egyptian night? Take up the white man's burden, ye dare not stoop to this, nor call too loud on freedom to cloak your weariness. By all ye cry or whisper, by all ye leave or do, the silent, sullen people shall wail gods and you. Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days, the lightly proffered laurel, the easy ungrudged praise. Come thou to search your manhood through all
That was boomerisms. That was, of course, the excellent Chris Gard. If you like good music, go and check out Chris Gard's channel on YouTube. And you can also find him on X on Twitter, where we are also live at the moment. I did notice a couple of comments in the chat about I think the World Cup's on. I don't follow sports ball anymore. I think it's part of the bread and circuses that stop us noticing that our countries are being destroyed before our eyes. And, I had a look at the England team and their German manager, and I'm not sure even half of them are actually English. I'm not really interested if they win, lose, or draw, I've got to be honest. So there we go. That's and listen, I was never a big football fan, but I was an enormous rugby union and cricket fan, and I don't even follow that anymore for precisely the same reasons that I don't watch football anymore. It's just it's shit, and the so-called England teams are not actually English. So there you go. Anyway, we're going to be talking about a great Englishman today from the Midlands, from Staffordshire, and fortunately, I've got Mitch as my guest, who comes from that part of the world, and so we're going to be talking about George Anson, who was one of the great 18th century admirals of the Royal Navy. Mitch, you're muted, Mitch.
Oh yeah. So I put this idea because last Tuesday I went over Shugborough, where the Anson family used to live. I may had that for generations until 1962, where they had to sell it because of inheritance tax, basically. So. But that particular family,
you mean it still belonged to the Anson family in 1962? Bloody hell!
Yeah, the only reason it's not the only reasons. The last guy was called George. He had to call himself like George Litchfield or something because weird aristocratic rules or something. But he still had like a photographic studio as an apartment in Shugborough, but it was sold off to the National Trust because basically the family got levied with a massive tax bill after the guy's family died.
It's what happened to most of the stately homes in Britain, pretty much. But it's pretty extraordinary that they were still there until the early 1960s, because as we were saying just before the stream started, George Anson, the founder of the family's fortunes, he was actually born in the late 1600s. So, yeah.
Yeah, because the thing was, George Anson had an older brother by the name of Thomas, but Thomas was a member of Parliament, and he was a lot more of a Philhellene, so he was very much into studying ancient Greece and visiting Rome and all that.
So he did the Grand Tour and all that kind of stuff, yeah.
Yeah, so George was the one who brought him the money for taking over the Nuestra Senora de Covadonga for that prize money, whereas Thomas was a guy who he designed, because if you go to Shugborough, there's a lot of ancient Greek architecture there. That's where the money went, basically, from all the prize money.
Yeah, cool. Anyway, to get us started, and as I say, this is mainly going to be Mitch's stream this evening. But to get us started, Anson joins the Royal Navy as a volunteer in 1712. So you're talking not long after the Duke of Marlborough was doing his stuff, pretty much.
Yeah, and I like some of the soldiers that Anson has to have aboard his ships. Some of them were veterans of Marlborough. And also,
battles like Malplaquet and Ramillies and all that kind of stuff. Yeah,
sure. Yeah. There was even one guy apparently. He was a bit older than the others, but he was a veteran of the Battle of the Boyne.
Wow! So that was 1690s, wasn't it?
1691, if I remember correctly. I keep thinking 1680. Yeah, back to Glorious Revolution. I'm thinking of.
1688 was the Glorious Revolution. But yeah, so this is a very early 18th century chap we're talking about here. He joins the Royal Navy as a volunteer. And normally, what would happen if you did that is you would be made a midshipman in due course, and that's what happened to Anson on another ship. And I'm happy to say we're joined by AI. Good evening, AI. How are you going, mate? You're
I'm
muted.
all right. Iron Duke. Hello, Iron Duke. Hello, Mitch. Yeah, all good here.
Excellent.
So looking forward to this one. And on a quick note, I will say today I believe it was 1597 on this day, Sir Francis Drake landed in North California and declared it New Albion, Nova Albion.
I don't think we'd want it nowadays, would we? California.
Well.
Half the Americans I know don't want California. I don't know about English one.
Do you know what? It even we joke about it, but it was a great state at one point. It really was when you look at its history, it was a great state, and it's a lot of interesting figures, and it's just, I mean, it's become a third world dive. A lot of it thanks to Reagan and his lot, unfortunately, but as a lot of Americans informed me what happened there.
Well,
But,
and of course, as we're being historical, and I did notice this, and I did think about it, but we've done it before. Tomorrow is, of course, Waterloo Day, so but we've done streams on Waterloo, and I thought no, we'll do Anson, and that was Mitch's suggestion anyway, because Anson comes from Mitch's part of the world. Which is actually not all that coastal, although I suppose it does have coastline, doesn't it, Mitch?
It's some. I mean, the nearest coast, you're talking Cheshire, which is what I'd say 60 mile from the sea. That's
fair enough. Well, it's not, which is actually not far at all. But then, of course, you're never far from the sea in Britain because we're an island.
Is it something like the furthest point inland is like, not even? It's something like it's double digits at most. Like it's not 100 miles.
It might be 100 would be about the most, I would imagine. If you were right in the middle of southeast England or maybe parts of the Highlands, you might be 100 miles away from the coast, but you'd be pushing it for sure.
Yeah, I suppose. Let's say Leicestershire, or I don't know. I'm trying to think. Yeah, like really middle, like Coventry way, perhaps. But
just north of London. Where the country's widest.
Well, Captain Cook, he was brought up in sort of like not really along the coastal of Yorkshire. It was more in, I guess, sort of north central Yorkshire. It was brought up a farming estate, and it wasn't until a later life he went, of course, to Whitby.
Well, and I will just say, guys, if you're interested in Captain Cook, there is a stream on this series about Captain Cook. We have already covered Captain Cook.
Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting. He of course, a bit different is Anson obviously did come from nobility. I believe one of his descendants was like positions like Lord Chancellor.
This was like that guy was alive. It was, I think, it was after Pitt the Younger, but it's kind of like tail end of the Napoleonic Wars, just after wars of that kind of time.
Yeah, one of Anson's relatives was the brother-in-law of the Earl of Macclesfield, and he was Lord Chancellor. But he was the brother-in-law of that dude, so it wasn't a particularly close relationship, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I know. And George Anson, after this particular voyage, he marries Sarah York, who is the daughter of the Earl of Hardwicke, who is one of the three main guys in power at the time of the 7 Years' War later on, which is why it helps Anson because Anson, of course, is First Lord of the Admiralty by that point, and it helps him.
Yeah, one of the things we'll come on to, Mitch, is that many of the successes of the Royal Navy in the 7 Years' War, what is known in the United States as the French and Indian Wars, the British did very well out of that war, partly because Pitt, the elder, was a very good prime minister, but he did most of his planning with Anson, who was.
I will correct it. It was the Duke of Newcastle who was a prime minister at the time. It was Pitt the elder. Technically, he was Secretary of State. That was his title, but to be fair, Pitt had so much influence, more than what his usual role would suggest. So it kind of was kind of. So he's like Duke of Newcastle was more of a
people call it the Pitt Ministry at the time. So
yeah, that's exactly.
he was the dominant character, shall we say?
Yeah. Prime Minister. I don't think Prime Minister was the.
It didn't really exist then. No, it didn't.
No,
but Duke of Newcastle.
The first guy who could claim to be Prime Minister was probably Lord North, wasn't he? AI and Mitch during the American War of Independence.
Yeah, because he centralized a few officers, I believe, in the position of
as Prime Minister.
Minister, yeah. So, I mean, effectively, it was like the role of a president in many ways. Yeah. As like
but yeah, all I'm trying to say briefly, because I'm jumping way ahead of our story here, is that the successes that the Royal Navy had in the 7 Years' War, and they were many, it was Anson who was the First Lord of the Admiralty at the time. He was the First Sea Lord at the time. He was the professional head of the Royal Navy at that time, and he was good at it. He did a lot of good reforms for the Navy and for the sailors, by the way, which we'll come on to.
Yeah, basically, some of the stuff that comes across in the voyage inspires some of his reforms. So we'll mention that as time passes.
Yeah, absolutely. Including, things like when Captain Cook goes on his round the world voyages, his crew don't all die of scurvy, for example, because Anson had learned his lesson, and the Royal Navy learned their lesson. But anyway, Mitch, please just maybe briefly give us his early career before he goes on his round-the-world voyage. I know you said to me before we started that he was actually based in the Carolinas in the USA these days. You're muted, Mitch.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I don't know if that's readable, but I just So, for example, it says he was generous without profusion, elegant without ostentation, and above all of a mind tender, tender humane disposition. He's benevolent, extensive, even to his own detriment. He never dances, nor swears, nor talks nonsense. That's what a lady in South Carolina said of him, because apparently he was a very hard guy to read, because he was very, very courteous, but he was also very quite shy. I wouldn't say shy, but very sort of reserved. He never liked to show emotion in public, and
he wasn't all that talkative either, I hear.
Yeah, that's one thing where that's often commented, where people will say he's a very, very gentlemanly, including the Spanish at one time during the time where they spent some time in China, which will be mentioned later. But yeah, very chivalrous to his enemies, which they don't fail to comment on. But also, yeah, he's kind of a firm but fair kind of variety of Royal Navy officer. And the thing about him was, of course, he joins in his early teens, because he was born in 1697. He was around 14 or 15 around that age, which is commonplace, of course, because he was an aristocrat. Yep. His aunt was the wife. I think his aunt was either the wife or the sister-in-law of a government official, like Lord Chancellor. So that's how he was able to get. He had good connections from his aunt's marriage, for example. Whereas his older brother, Thomas,
he did, and joining at 14 was pretty typical. This is what most Royal Navy officers did. This is one reason why the Royal Navy became such a successful military organization, because when your officers join the Navy at 14 as midshipmen, or as in Anson's case, a volunteer who then becomes a midshipman, it tends to mean that by the time you're promoted to lieutenant and you're an actual officer, you know your business. You've learnt navigation. You've learnt to command. You've had command of ships, boats, possibly prizes, and all this kind of stuff. So it tends to make good, skillful, experienced officers. Basically, if you join at 14, by the time you're 21, you're a veteran, really.
Yeah. So, for example, George Anson, because he takes control of the squadron that we know him for in his 40s. So between his early teens up to his early 40s, there's not much to be said, because I mean the two books I read didn't really say that much. It just said he was commanding a 6-gun ship, which I can't remember the name of, but yeah, this was like when he was in his 20s, and then he spent a fair bit of time in South Carolina because
was
he's
it,
working on.
sorry, what was it? HMS Scarborough, the 6th rate you were thinking of?
No. He served on a 4th rate and a 3rd rate, and then he served on HMS Hampshire, another 4th rate, in the Baltic Sea, and then he saw service against Spain. He fought in the Battle of Cape Passaro in 1718 in the War of the Quadruple Alliance, and then he served in HMS Balfour, which was the flagship of Admiral George Byng. And of course, anyone who knows anything about Royal Navy history knows that George Byng is quite famous because he ended up getting shot for not fighting hard enough, basically, to encourage the others. They shot him on the quarterdeck of his own flagship.
Yeah, that was fall of Minorca, I believe, in the early stage of the 7 Years' War.
Yes, it was. Yeah. Yes, he was. Anson was promoted to commander in 1722, and he was given a small 8-gun ship, HMS Weasel. And basically, he was involved in suppressing smuggling between Britain and the Netherlands, which he did quite successfully, apparently. Then he was sent to the Carolinas in the United States, or what's now the United States. Obviously, in those days, it was a British colony. He did some quite good work there. He was escorting British merchant ships and all this kind of stuff. And then he was given command of the 60-gun 3rd-rate ship, HMS Centurion. And this is the ship that he is going to command on his round-the-world voyage, which lasts for 4 years, by the way.
Yeah,
and
so
she's a 60-gun ship, which in Nelson's era was a fairly small ship, to be honest. It was a ship of the line. It was a battleship.
Yeah,
but it was the smallest. But in this era, in the 1730s, the 74s hadn't yet been standardized. So a 60-gun ship was a pretty powerful ship back then.
Yeah, and so for example, you got 16 74 guns here, 100 gunships. Like I think HMS Victor was commissioned in 1769, if I remember correctly, by Benjamin Slade.
Yeah, sounds about right. Right, Mitch.
Because the thing was, around this time in the 1730s, basically we had was a naval hierarchy who were pretty much all geriatric. So like the First Order of Admirals, who was 70, the guy designing all the ships, whose name I forget, but he preceded Benjamin Slade, who was much younger. He was also in his 70s. And the thing was, while they were capable men in their own right, there's a thing about how old men, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So that's why it's not until the 1760s you start getting 100 gunships. So
I resent that, Mitch. I resent that.
Well, I mean, I suppose you're as young as you feel, but Yeah.
You're as young as who you're feeling, is what we used to say. But anyway,
yeah.
I mean, some of, as I said on the age thing, when you look at the 'cause I know this coincided with the War of Jenkins Ear, which is part of the Austrian succession, the War of the Austrian Succession. You have like who was it? Edward Vernon, for example, who senior naval officer, commander, and he, of course, started off his career before the formation of Great Britain, when it was the English Navy. And we talked about this, Iron Duke, in previous stream during the Glorious Revolution. Before, on the eve of that, during James II, at that point, the English Navy, as it was then, probably on par with what the current British Navy is today, but it was in a diabolical state even for that time. And so you got
it was a mess, mate. It really was. It was a mess.
Yeah. I mean, very similar today in today's Navy. Back in James II, most of the ships were unusable, heavily damaged. The crew was stealing parts from the ship and on borderline mutiny, and they couldn't pay the wages for the sailors.
People have probably heard of Samuel Pepys, who's famous as a diarist, of course. But what he really did as a job was he was one of the senior administrators of the Navy, and he did a great deal to clean up corruption and make the Navy more efficient. Yeah. That was one of the things that Pepys did.
And it can. The thing though is, like, you think about that time and what we're talking about now, sort of the current time period we're talking about here with with George Anson. It's a relatively short time frame that the Navy was able to recover and actually not just be functional, but start to become the best, or one of the best.
The time from when the Dutch came up the Medway and burnt a number of Royal Navy ships to the time when the Royal Navy starts to really rule the waves, it's not even 100 years. It's more like 60 years, something like that.
Yeah,
some of these I was just going to say, and for some of these officers that we're talking about now, like Edward Vernon, he would have seen that, because he would have, he started as a, probably at 14, 15, by the looks of it. And he saw, basically the lowest point of the Navy and pretty much left at its, on its ascendancy.
Yep, and of course, anyone who's served in the Royal Navy or knows anything about the Royal Navy will know that at least until recently, it may still be going, but at least until recently, HMS Vernon was a shore training establishment for the Royal Navy.
Yeah, I know. So another thing was, when we had the American Revolutionary War, I did mention back on that Napoleonic War stream, basically the Navy was mothballed because of Lord North, because he had to cut expenditure in ways to pay off the debts, and one of those was the Royal Navy, which is why the Franco-Spanish fleets together were able to outpace us in the American War, which is why we lost Chesapeake Bay. Whereas Peter the Younger,
which is why we lost the war, by the way. I mean, it was because the Royal Navy lost control of the Atlantic on the far side of the Atlantic. That's why Britain lost the American War of Independence.
Yeah,
and plus, of course, the many French troops who were poured into America. And Britain wasn't just fighting the French; we were fighting the Spanish, and we were also fighting the Dutch at the same time. So,
yeah, but the thing was, under Peter the Younger, we built enough ships in the space of 4 years that we were able to bully the French into doing what we wanted, which is so it's that's kind of like sort of ebbs and flows of the 17th and 18th centuries, I suppose. Yeah, where
it started under Walpole. And it continued under Pitt, and this is something that Richard said. Back then, you had an elite class of elites who actually thought in a very, very long term strategy, and you had competent military generals, admirals, and officer corps who also thought in a long-term strategy, which uh, is unthinkable today. That anyone in the, it's
Well,
unthinkable today.
in general terms, AI, you can say that the 18th century saw the Royal Navy on the up and up. It just got better and better through the whole of the 18th century. And you could argue that continued for the whole of the 19th century as well, really. But certainly for the whole of the 18th century, you start off with people like Anson that we're going to talk about this evening, and you end up with people like Nelson. So, I mean, it just got better and better and better, basically.
Yeah, because it's like, because we were talking about great man fever last week, and it's like, well, because we would regard Nelson as a great man, but you need someone like George Anson, who's not, who's, I don't want to say lesser man, but certainly he's a guy who builds things in Macquarie. It's kind of like you don't get Alexander the Great without his father Philip, much the same way that you need
100. Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like Alexander the Great couldn't have done what he did without Philip building the Macedonian army. Absolutely correct.
Yeah. So you have the late 1730s, early 1740s, where we're itching for a fight with the Spanish, and Parliament is looking for any excuse to try it, which is where the famous sailor Jenkins gets his ear cut off, and that kickstarts a war, which was inevitable because going back to the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, which ended the Spanish War of Succession, regarding whether Louis XIV's grandson takes over Spain or not. There were certain clauses, for example, here in the Caribbean, you get sugar. Slaves would be traded from areas like Gambia and I'm trying to think what Gold Coast. I think this is Gold Coast.
Yeah, Nigeria. Yeah, Nigeria and the Gold Coast. Yeah.
Yeah, so we get to trade slaves over to areas like Hispaniola, Cuba, Florida, and so on.
Yeah.
And the Spanish felt that we were being dishonest with it, so there were tensions over the slave trade in the Caribbean, and
the Gold Coast, guys, is what's now called Ghana, by the way.
Just to add a bit of context, the reason why we took this course of action is because during the Wars of Succession, there was a risk that there would be an offshoot of the French monarchy, the Bourbons, on the throne of Spain, and so that there would be like Spain and France properly united in a sort of dynastic alliance, and that was for the Habsburgs as well. That was with their claims on Spain, that wasn't possible. That they couldn't accept it as well. It's also worth noting, you can see on the map there quite like the main tradable produce from the Americas. So we have obviously Rupert's Land, the Hudson Bay Company, ultimately furs, and back then I think it was 10 pelts was about £30,000 today. So you can probably see why it was such a lucrative trade. But the main export from the Americas, which was wealthy, was from the silver mines in Peru, in Spanish-controlled South America. And effectively, at this point, the silver had greater worth, and historically speaking, has had a level of greater worth than gold in some cases. But because at this point, most of the silver reserves in the world at this time was from Peru, and hence why the Spanish Empire was, not just vast but incredibly wealthy, and a wealthy society, and this was. It's a sort of side note, but nobody actually knew how many. The Spanish were very tight-lipped and secretive when it came to their silver mines, because they wanted to control the market flow of silver into the European markets to basically And I don't want to go like total econ here, but basically it was control the price. They didn't want to flood it because they wanted to keep the price of silver high as possible, which benefited them for trade. And one of the big things that George Anson would do is sort of how can I say, bugger up that plan a wee bit.
Yeah, I just add on to that. So, for example, with that, but the original plan that George Anson was part of was so there'd be a Marine force landed in Panama on the Caribbean side, while Anson would come in through the southern tip of. So there was plans to go for Northwest Passage of Hudson Bay, but they couldn't find it, so they had to go through Cape Horn and eventually come up on this side of Panama. And in so doing, they'd try and cut off the Spanish trade. So, for example, what would happen is you'd have there was port of Lima in Peru where they would send up crates of silver up to a place called Acapulco, where they would turn it into coins and then ship over the coins to over to Manila in the Philippines, by which they trade with China for.
It's worth pointing out Anson was given a squadron of 8 ships. Only 6 of them were warships. 2 of them were merchant ships just carrying supplies. And even one of the so-called warships was really there to carry supplies, and particularly small arms and gunpowder for landing parties and this stuff. And most of his ships were not large. The largest ship he had was HMS Centurion, which, as I said, was a 60-gun ship of the line. But a lot of the other ships were quite small. And to cut a long story short here, so this stream doesn't go 3 hours, by the time Anson gets down to Cape Horn, which Mitch, do you have a map of the bottom of South America? I see that you've got the top there.
I'll try and find out above.
Cape Horn is some of the worst weather in the whole world. Still is, right? Merchant ships don't go around Cape Horn if they can avoid it, to be honest. Which is why the Panama Canal is pretty useful.
We talked about it. You got the 2 passages. You got Magellan's Passage and Drake's Passage.
Yes, and of course the Drake Passage is named after Sir Francis Drake. But if you go down to the bottom of South America, like the Falkland Islands are up here.
Yeah, but not really mapped well because at this time it was kind of. I think technically we had them, but we wasn't really settled, so it's not properly mapped. But yeah,
no one really had them at that time. But the Falkland Islands are around about up here, and this is Tierra del Fuego, and this is the tip of South America, and this stretch of ocean down here is some of the roughest seas and the biggest winds and the most gigantic waves you'll see in the world. So all I wanted to say was 2 of the ships just couldn't get round. The weather was too bad, and they went back to England. So that leaves Anson with 6 ships. And as he's going around, another one of the ships gets lost in a storm. I think it was
HMS Wager. He got shipwrecked in Ireland, which to this day is called Ireland Wager.
Yeah, and then that was in Tierra del Fuego, I do believe, wasn't it, Mitch?
I
think it's the island off. It's probably part of Chile now, I think.
Yeah, it's the Chile island of Tierra del Fuego. It's also worth noting that at that time, the Patagonia, because it's all part of Patagonia, it wasn't actually colonized by Spain. It was just empty land. Even this far south, there was hardly any native tribal territory. So at this point, there was really little. Like in Patagonia, there wasn't any Spanish presence until I think a couple decades later. There was like a southward drive.
It's not until Argentina, but they did talk about some gauchos in Patagonia, but aside from really small cattle rustling kind of thing, and some in native Mapuche tribes, there's not really anything. And the thing about was the original plan was that So one reason why the Spanish were tight-lipped about the silver trade was because the Indians in the area were almost rebellious. Because it's worth noting, what happens eventually with Simon Bolivar after in the 1820s, we planned to do exactly that back in this time. We planned on getting the Spanish American colonies to rise up in rebellion, but because of constant delays logistically upon Anson's, Anson has to set off at much later a time than he originally wanted, which is why he goes at really the worst possible time. So
Mitch, we need to talk a little bit about Anson's cruise in a sec, but just before we do, just to answer Woodpit here, he said it looked terrifying as portrayed in Master and Commander, the movie. Well, if you're interested in this voyage that we're talking about this evening, actually Patrick O'Brian, who wrote the original Master and Commander novels, he's also got a couple of novels that he wrote before he wrote the Aubrey Maturin books. And one of them is very closely based on HMS Wager. And it's a really good book. I recommend it if you haven't read it. And he sticks very closely to, I think it was Midshipman Byron's diaries. And Byron, of course, the midshipman, who later on becomes a Royal Navy Admiral himself, he was one of the poet Byron's ancestors.
Yeah. So regarding the passage, they went for this little strait called if I can give them Strait Le Maire, because if they went for the Strait of Magellan, which is named after the famous Magellan who sailed it, they would have got shipwrecked. The Spanish, in their infinite wisdom, decided to go through this and got ship. They suffered more damage going through this than we did. So that's why Anson doesn't have to worry too much about the Spanish squadron leader Pizarro chasing after him, because he's even more shipwrecked than Anson was.
Absolutely, but just to talk a little bit about Anson's cruise, because they do affect this voyage. And one of the reasons that when Anson becomes the first Sea Lord, the professional head of the Navy, one of the things he's really famous for is getting rid of most of the corruption out of the Royal Navy, and also looking after seamen's health. And the reason he does this is that in order to save money on this voyage, he's given a load of overaged seamen, some of whom were taken out of hospital because they had more or less recovered from whatever ailed them or wounds that they'd had.
Yeah,
and
I know.
So he doesn't have a really young, fit crew to start with. Okay,
Yeah,
he has, as Mitch mentioned, I can't remember now, Mitch, whether we said this on the stream or when we were talking before the stream, but he has soldiers in his unit.
Yeah,
soldiers as Marines on his ships, at least one of whom fought in the Battle of the Boyne in the 1690s.
Yeah, I'm a thing about those guys. So there were 500 Marines, of whom 260 were Chelsea pensioners. And
so, yeah, the guys who you can see today, who are the old blokes who wear their red coats and their tricorn hats when they're on parade, who are and they're all like 60, 70, 80 even ex-British soldiers. And some of these guys were handed off to Anson as his Marines.
Yeah, and the other Marines were the complete opposite. They were like almost teenage boys who never fired a musket before. So it was just there were so many comedic errors on the part of the Royal Navy. Well, it was the British Army actually, because the Marines weren't under Royal Navy authority at this point.
This is another thing that Anson is famous for. It was Anson who made the Royal Marines part of the Royal Navy and not part of the British Army.
That's right. He took it from the army and from Army Authority and delivered it to the Navy, as well as issuing, I believe it was standard uniforms for officers.
Yes. We'll come to all this when we talk about his career subsequent to this voyage.
Yeah,
because this voyage was kind of the highlight of his career, and it also as we said just before you joined us, the prize that Anson eventually takes is probably the richest single prize in terms of prize money the Royal Navy ever took.
Yeah, no. Just as a small note, so as they were sailing past into the Atlantic, they go past Madeira, which it took them 6 weeks to get there, while it usually takes 2, because of how late in the year they set off. Plus, also another problem I had was because everyone is so bunched up in these ships, like everyone's so tightly crowded in. They only have each crewman and Royal Marine and so on. They only have something like 14 inches of space with their bunks. So typhus and dysentery become very commonplace because they get it from land back in Portsmouth, travels through the crowd. So HMS Gloucester, for example, already lost something like half her crew and marine complement.
You mean their hammocks, Mitch?
Did I say bunks? Hammocks, yeah.
Hammocks. They had hammocks in those days, which actually are more comfortable if you can sling them properly. But anyway, so Anson was given in large part, unhealthy and elderly crew to start with, and also a lot of young dudes who had very little training. And so, unsurprisingly, he loses a lot of these dudes as he's going around through the roughest seas in the world. And he ends up with only his own ship, with only HMS Centurion. And even on HMS Centurion, he loses a lot of guys, and he mostly loses them to scurvy, which was not really understood in those days. It's a lack of vitamin C. Humans, like most mammals, can't make our own vitamin C, which is why you have to have citrus fruits, also some green vegetables and all this kind of stuff give it to you. But this is another thing that when Anson becomes First Sea Lord, he sorts this out, which is why people like Captain Cook can go and do their voyages and not lose anyone hardly from scurvy.
Yeah, because the thing was, so typhus and dysentery carry off like big chunks of the men already, let alone scurvy, which you especially get in the Pacific. And with another thing was, so scurvy, one thing, it's especially excruciating upon these elderly Chelsea pensioners because all their wounds that they suffered in serving under the Duke of Marlborough and before that the Boyne, all their wounds just open up as though they never healed to begin with, and it's just excruciating for them.
Yeah. Old wounds open up with scurvy. Your teeth drop out. Your gums get inflamed. It's a very nasty illness.
Yeah. Later in the voyage, around an island called Tinian, which is not far from. Americans might notice it on the map because it's not far from Saipan, which Americans will know. But it's around that neck of the woods in the Pacific where they do get some citrus fruits, which kind of alleviate it. But one thing that's worth noting is that in terms of the men on this voyage, none of the commissioned officers actually get killed, or there's only one guy, one of the captains, who has to go back home. But other than that, all the commissioned officers survive. That's
not entirely true, Mitch. On HMS Centurion.
I must have read it wrong.
On the other ships, officers do die. Believe me.
I remember now.
On HMS Centurion, the officers don't die, except one guy gets sick and has to go home. But on these other originally 7 ships, yes, quite a few officers die.
I was going to share there's photographs of scurvy and what it looks like. I'm not going to share it though because it is incredibly unpleasant and quite gruesome.
You probably shouldn't AI this because YouTube won't like it.
But one thing it basically does is you end up it is almost like your skin goes necrotic, but your body goes a yellowy color, and it's not nice at all.
I know. Woodpit's asking, how do we figure scurvy out? Well, as when we get into certain Pacific islands with citrus fruits, they noticed that scurvy started to lay off a bit when they start eating that kind of stuff. So they didn't know why at the time, but they stopped. But also the surgeons on board, they were thinking, it's not just the citrus fruit, it must be because of bad air. Because of one thing you got to factor, I said, because these guys are all bunched up like 40 inches of space in their hammocks, there's a lot of filth on the floors, so they always have to clean up every time we stop.
Although to be fair, like ships were cleaned, and they were usually cleaned with vinegar in those days because that was the best antiseptic they had, and it's not a terrible antiseptic from that point of view.
Yeah.
But they do gradually work out that it's green vegetables and citrus fruits. And so, for example, when Captain Cook does his voyage, he takes loads of sauerkraut with him, which does stave off scurvy, although many of his sailors didn't like it. He had to flog at least one dude to make sure they ate it because, it was going to stop them getting scurvy. But later on, of course, the Royal Navy starts using limes, and they put the lime juice into the rum. And this is why Americans still sometimes call the Brits limeys. It was because the Royal Navy used to put lime juice into the rum of their sailors, and it would stop them getting scurvy.
It was known. It was known at the time that there was a dietary element to it because the Scandinavians had this habit of what was it, making preserving food and all that sort of stuff, for similar relating problems, and there was a quick correlation between element of diet. Too much red meat. I remember there was a good book on medicine back in the 16th, a couple of century before, about eating too much red meat or rich food can give you stomach ulcers and all that sort of stuff. And so there was a knowledge of that at the time, and that was one of the reasons why Captain Cook as you mentioned there was a particularly also from the Royal Society that there was this even though it was his own initiative, but as being like a fellow of that society, it was I wouldn't say he was testing it out, but he was able to implement it on a mass scale.
Yeah, you've got to understand that a Royal Navy sailor in a very long voyage like this, and Anson's voyage lasted 4 years. On a very long voyage like this, they're eating salt pork, salt beef, they're eating dried peas, they're eating ship's biscuit, which is basically twice baked biscuit, which is very hard. And that's their basic menu. Yes, they get some stuff, if they can get fresh food, they will, but they won't often get it. And particularly on Anson's voyage, of course, because all of the territory on the Pacific side of South America at that time was run by the Spanish. Anson couldn't just land at a port and say, I'd like to get some fresh vegetables, please. Because the Spanish would have killed him and his men, basically.
Yeah. I know. Another one complication that Anson had to deal with was on board his ships, he had to have like £15,000 worth of South Sea Company goods for the sake of trade. But when he goes over to Brazil to purchase food and other stuff for his men, he could only get like a day's worth of food for his men because prices plus also the goods he had weren't what they were looking for. So again, that's where the South Sea Company, their politics, screw over Anson even more, because even if, let's say, he knew about citrus curing scurvy, he couldn't stockpile enough of it because he had to deal with this £15,000 worth of South Sea Company merchandise. He was forced to stockpile, even though he didn't want to. So, yeah, that was another layer of difficulty.
But it comes back again, Mitch, to one of the stories about this voyage is that it was cursed before it started, and it was cursed by a lot of corruption and a lot of backhanders paid in money by people like the South Sea Company to the government and the Royal Navy and all this, you know. There was a lot of corruption going on, which is why, as we'll speak of towards the end of the stream, when Anson actually gets power in the Royal Navy, he's totally against any sort of corruption.
Yeah, so there were two victualling agents. Victualling basically means the logistics sort of thing, so for people who don't know. And these two guys called Tassel and Hutchinson, they were just very corrupt guys. Like they were forced upon Anson because they were South Sea Company guys, and Anson had to have them because politics, plus also they were logistical kind of types. But yeah, they screwed him up.
I think it's interesting, you know, Anson, he gets around Cape Horn and he gets into the Pacific, which is, you know, where he was sent to go. But he started off with 8 ships, and when he gets into the Pacific, he's only got one left, his own ship, HMS Centurion, and he's even lost quite a lot of guys off HMS Centurion. Now, most people in that situation would probably have given up and gone home, but Anson doesn't do that at all. He carries on with his mission.
Yeah, and as you can see, like you got the Juan Fernandez archipelago. So, but there's this island called Robinson Crusoe, which is what's now known as today, because the Chileans renamed it from Juan Fernandez to Robinson Crusoe after the famous book, because that's where Alexander Selkirk, Scottish sailor who got shipwrecked there ages ago.
He's the guy who Robinson Crusoe is based on.
Yeah, he was originally
he's another guy we could do a stream on at some stage, by the way.
Yeah, so
that's Daniel Defoe. Is that Daniel Defoe? Or am I thinking of
Daniel Defoe wrote Robinson Crusoe, but it was based on Alexander Selkirk.
Yes, and what inspired him was he heard about it. Daniel Defoe heard about Alexander Selkirk while he was in captivity after the Monmouth Rebellion, because a lot of those guys were sent to the West Indies, and he heard about the stories of shipwreck and escaped slaves, and so that's where he heard the story. Sorry, anyway, that's a bit of a side note there,
but yeah, that's basically what happened. So HMS Centurion gets to this archipelago way ahead of the others because of the Southeast Pacific winds and all the rest of it blow a lot of them off course. So
you could say, Mitch, that Anson's expedition at this point is close to being a disaster. It's this close to being a total disaster, and the only bloke who keeps it going is Anson himself.
Yeah, because HMS Wager got shipwrecked on an island now known as Isla Wager in Chile. HMS Pearl and HMS Seven, they both got back to England. HMS Pearl, the captain basically crapped himself because he had vitamin deficiency, which caused his thinking to go haywire, basically. And what happened was he tucked out and ran back to England, even though he suffered more casualties on the return journey than he did getting to that point, which is what caused him to turn back. HMS Seven, however, lost something like 2/3 to 3/4 of the men on board by the time it got to Tierra del Fuego. So it was understandable for HMS Seven. But anyway, after this voyage, neither of those two captains of HMS Seven and HMS Pearl get blamed by Anson because he's very understanding why they turned back, and he's still able to proceed with a mission anyway. So, but it was HMS Wager he was really missing because it was a supply ship.
Yeah, and he was supposed to arrive in the Pacific on this enemy coast because the whole of the Pacific coast of the Americas was basically Spanish in those days, with 8 ships, and he actually arrives there with 1. And he's already lost about a quarter of his crew.
It's quite ironic because, probably over 100 years, 100 and a bit years later, earlier, Sir Francis Drake, he followed the same route, was raiding up the coast, but he had the similar problem where, because of, as you mentioned, Duke, the total Spanish control. all along Latin America, the Pacific coastline. Francis Drake had to go north, looking for the Northwest Passage, and because he was in hot pursuit by Spanish ships, and there was that point where I think Francis Drake basically told his crew, like, listen, we can't turn back, because to turn back is certain death. And I think with Anson that there was a similar thing. Well, if we carry on, we have a chance. If we turn back, if it's not the elements and disease, then it will be the Spanish that will get us.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe, Mitch, that Anson does raid a couple of minor Spanish settlements on the South American coast, doesn't he?
Yeah, raids a place called Paita, which is halfway. I can't find a map. It's like somewhere around here. It's like halfway between Lima and Ecuador. It's a really small. It's not a valuable harbor because aside from some goats and some.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
an
it's not from
agriculture.
yeah,
It's like it's like an agricultural port, not too far from Lima, and it was possibly the reason for the raid was just to grab, not so much. I mean, with Drake, he ended up like really raiding around Santiago, Lima, up to Colombia as well. He was raiding towns and
But hang on, AI. Bear in mind, right? Drake was 200 years earlier, more than 200 years earlier, and the Spanish had less force and less military in that part of the world when Drake was doing this. When Anson's doing this, the Spanish have much more military along the coast, and they also have more warships. And so with only one 60-gun ship, Anson has to be pretty careful where he's going to raid. He can't raid Lima; he'd get destroyed with one.
Well, that's ship. The point. The reason why there was such a strengthening of Spanish naval patrols, but also Lima became a walled city pretty much after. A lot of it was because of Drake. A lot of it was because of that incident.
Most of the Spanish possessions on the Pacific coast of South America, the major ports, they got fortifications, they got forts and all this kind of stuff, for sure.
Yeah. So because the two main Chilean ports were Valdivia and Valparaiso, but even though Chile was lightly armed, I mean, because Anson himself, he opined that had the expedition gone exactly as planned, as he told the Admiralty, he should have gone a lot earlier with better human material on his side and all the rest of it. He could have provoked a rebellion in Chile or Peru because the natives there were actually genuinely angry. But because of the Spanish attacks on the guy called Pizarro, who was actually descended from the same Pizarro who destroyed the Incan Empire, he was able to intimidate the natives into not rebelling. Plus, the fact that this particular voyage was just so poorly planned out and thought out by the Admiralty and whatnot back home, that any sort of rebellion, like what we eventually support with Simon Bolivar, doesn't happen in this time. Because, but had things gone a lot better for Anson, there's every reason to believe he would have stoked a rebellion and things got much differently.
If he'd arrived with 8 warships and he could have put 1,000 men ashore, then he could have done quite serious damage to the Spanish. But he had one warship that by this stage probably doesn't even have 400 sailors on it, let alone guys he can give muskets to and leave the ship. And when they raid this little agricultural port, Paita, the guy in charge of a village, he basically runs away, and at this point you start getting a sense where the Spanish start respecting Anson, because he was very chivalrous, including to because the governor, he just got married to a 17-year-old bride. He was like 50 and she was 17, and he was very chivalrous towards her because the husband abandoned his young wife to the. So what
they were calling us the English dogs. So,
whereas Anson was actually a gentleman. Surprise, surprise. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
you didn't have any like rape. I mean, like, you didn't have any like rape, looting, and torching of settlement or anything like that. No, and enslaving the population.
So anyway, guys, before we go on, can I just say to people, because over an hour in, guys, if you would like to support the channel, and I am desperate for support for the channel at the moment, I am on a pretty fixed income. I'm pretty much retired, and I'm spending $200 a month running this channel, pretty much. So if you would like to support us you can do so via Subscribestar, and that is pinned at the bottom of the chat on YouTube. And it's $5 a month, a whole $5 a month, guys. But yeah, I'd be most grateful if you would support us on that one, guys. Not trying to be a dirty grifter. Anything I get just goes on running the channel, really. I mean, like paying for StreamYards, which I have to, and paying to stream on X, which I have to, and that kind of stuff. And also I get moaned at quite frequently to get a new microphone. I can't afford one at the moment, guys, but when I can, I'll get one. Anyway, yeah, so Anson at this stage, he decides he's going to cross the Pacific and head towards China and the Philippines. The Philippines, of course, was another Spanish possession. And at that point, I'm going to hand it back over to Mitch.
Yeah, so he spends like a fair bit of while. I think it spends like a fair month or two at Tinian, which is nearby Saipan. And you also got Guam, because the thing about Tinian was he had like this Native American settlement, which the Spanish forced them to move there because there were wild hogs on the island, which the Native Americans kept. And it was kind of like a logistical way station for the Spanish Navy in the area, alongside Guam, which is the only Central Pacific place that's actually got a garrison. So when you because at this point, HMS Gloucester is the only other ship that
Can I just say two things, Mitch? First of all, Woodpit, thank you for that. But what I have to do in order for my microphone to not sound bad is to put the lead of my microphone around the back of my neck, which means I have to be within about 18 inches of my computer screen. And I'm not even joking. The other thing I would just say is my son's been to Guam. My son is serving in the Royal Navy, and his ship pulled into Guam a couple of years ago. Well, actually, a bit more than that. It was when the China virus nonsense was going on, and it was the only time they were allowed off their ship on a voyage that basically took them to some of the best places in the Pacific. The only place they were allowed ashore was Guam, which these days is a U.S. Navy base, and I can't say my son was that impressed with it, to be honest, but there we go. But then there weren't many chicks or anything,
Well, with not impressed with the island or the U.S. Navy base?
No. With the fact that it wasn't like he wanted to go ashore in Japan and Australia. They weren't allowed ashore in Japan or Australia. They had to go ashore on a fucking U.S. Navy base. It'd be like if you were an American and you were going to England and you were only allowed ashore in Portsmouth. It'd be a bit of a disappointment, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Because the thing about that's pretty much, there's not much to be said about the whole thing about Tinians. Like at this point in August 1742, HMS Gloucester sinks. Now, fortunately, because they did, it's not just the later ship we'll talk about that they got the prize money from. They raided a Spanish ship by the name of Nuestra Senora de Carmen, which they took a lot of prize money. It wasn't really nowhere near as much as the later ship we'll discuss, but it took some prize money. HMS Gloucester had some of that prize money, and they took it from Gloucester into Centurion. So the crews of 3 ships, Centurion, Gloucester, and Ariel, I think it was called, or something like that. It's a weird name. Had to be consolidated into the crew of HMS Centurion, which was
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah.
so that's kind of how bad the situation was. The other ships by that point were lost, either through 2 ships going back home, 1 ship getting shipwrecked, or indeed the others sinking halfway through the Pacific, or just being lost along the way. Anyway, Centurion is the only one left by this point.
Incidentally, just so people know we know about this, when HMS Wager ran ashore in Tierra del Fuego, there was a mutiny subsequent to that, and there may or may not have even been some cannibalism.
Yeah, there was that midshipman you mentioned, John Byron. He had a dog with him, but unfortunately, the crewmen they ate the dog because they're that hungry. So,
yes, indeed, it was really they had a rough time. Let's say this. We might even do a stream at some stage on HMS Wager. But Byron stayed loyal to the captain, whereas many of the men didn't, and they tried to go home on a rowboat via the east coast of South America. Didn't go very well for them. The Spanish captured some of them. A few of them did eventually get home. But but Richard Hughes, I agree with you about dogs. I'd as likely eat a person as a dog, because I like all dogs and a fair number of humans. But whatever.
See, I would probably, if I had the choice, I'd probably resort to cannibalism and eating my dog.
Same.
Yeah, I'd sooner eat most humans than my dog, for sure. Yes, I agree.
Yeah. The thing about HMS Wager, Patrick O'Brien wrote a book about it called The Golden Ocean. I haven't read it, but I've heard that's what the book's based on. HMS Wager.
It's really good, Mitch. It's a really good book. I recommend it.
Just for clarity, YouTube, we don't. We have no interest in eating people.
We're talking hypothetically, YouTube.
Yeah. So, they set off from Tinian, nearby Saipan, towards the goal past. You see the dotted line here. The goal past. It used to be called Formosa, but we now know it's Taiwan. And they land in Canton, which
didn't he? At this point, along the travel, didn't Anson discover several islands, or chart several?
Yeah,
islands?
he discovered some, and he got some Spanish charts, which told the British Admiralty eventually about some other islands, but also the Spanish charts had some fictitious islands on them as well, because the Spanish were not like Captain Cook. They didn't check everything,
Yeah, and that's if there's one thing I find humorous when reading about this was the fact that while the British sailors are better at surviving a storm, the Spanish are spooked too much by stormy weather, and they really just they can't really deal with much other than calm seas, which I suppose is understandable, because if anyone's ever been to the Canary Islands or Balearic Islands, for example, those areas have largely smooth seas. Like, you don't really have anything like the North Sea or the British coastline, that neck of the woods. So,
no, the Med is pretty calm for the most part. You do get storms in the Med, but only occasionally.
The one example I can think of Phantom Island is Pepys Island, which was misidentified as it was actually the Falkland Islands. But there was one that was called Pepys Island. May have also been South Georgia, but I doubt it. I think when you look at old charts of it, from
that would have been a long way south to go.
Yeah.
AI for the Spanish, but if they found South Georgia.
The reason that they think it's the Falklands is it shows a very rough sketching of 2 islands close together with mountains at either end of both islands, which, Mount Tumbledown, Mount London. It does look like the Falkland Islands. And
Sure. Yeah, no, I'm sure you're right. Mitch, as you said, he goes to what is now Taiwan, which used to be called Formosa. And I think he gets a hard time off the Chinese, doesn't he?
Yeah, because the thing was, the Chinese, they're so the guy who wrote a bit of a voyage back in the 1740s was a reverend who does not have much good to say about the Chinese. He said they are industrious, but they would. So, for example, when Anson had to buy provisions off the Chinese, they were known for stuffing the animals full of water and other stuff and stones to make them weigh more, so that they would command a higher price. So, for example, the hogs would be force-fed water to the point where their stomachs nearly burst, and they actually cut off the penises so they could not urinate, and they kept the water in. And they're doing that while they were alive.
That
They weren't doing
sounds
it-
like
yeah.
that sounds like the Chinese. They don't. The Chinese are probably, and they're completely different to the Japanese in this way. They're one of the cruelest people in the whole fucking world. But anyway, whatever.
That's quite interesting because when I was reading about the Mongols and the Silk Road, one thing that the Mongols would like chroniclers would would say is that Chinese merchants were very untrustworthy. That's
Yeah,
quite interesting. That sort of like proves there is, even like the Mongols and the Japanese and even the British later on from Calcutta and the East India Company, when they were like saying, well, okay, yeah, we flood your markets full of dope, but you guys are just untrustworthy, unscrupulous buggers as well.
yeah.
Um,
Um,
yeah,
I got a quote here from the guy who wrote about the voyage back in the 1740s, from 1748. It said the Chinese were industrious, but as far as arts and crafts went, they were mere servile imitators. For evidence of the absurdity of Chinese culture, one only had to look at their writing, if such it could be called, whereas other nations had developed long logistical combinations of letters and words, but Chinese relied on scratched marks and characters, too many for the human memory. The famed morality and equity of Chinese government was another example of Jesuitical fictions, because the Jesuits had this weird PR thing where they claimed that the Chinese are a lot better than they actually were, like because they thought the Confucian ethics and all that were superior to European and stuff like that. Bit wacky, third
yeah,
worldism.
it's like silly Orientalism, and there is something to be said by that. The Chinese operate as a collective mass, probably why communism, did quite well there on a social level. But they've always been a collective people. But the problem is, and I think there's something true, they have very, very poor qualities when it comes to art and literature when you compare it to the Japanese. The Japanese are very much an artistic people compared to their Chinese neighbors, and you even see this today if you look at literature or film, television, games and everything. What the Chinese do is they'll just oversaturate the market of it, but it will be crap quality.
I'd also
Yeah,
say the Japanese like dogs, whereas the Chinese eat them. But yeah,
yeah, yeah. So one thing, for example, when because there's an Imari vase at Shugborough, which notice like this artistic quality. This is Japanese. It's kind of based on Chinese designs, but a lot of Chinese artifacts are really just Japanese made because people often comment that Japanese made stuff is not superior in
Well,
style and substance compared to
I,
Chinese
I,
stuff.
and I can hear now people saying, okay, AI, but what about the Ming Dynasty? What about all the thing with the Ming Dynasty is they just copied what the previous dynasty, which was the Yan Dynasty, which was a Mongol dynasty, they copied the styles. If you look at the styles, it is very much a direct copy, but also particularly with like the use of various China, Ming China. But the thing is, a lot of their crockery, which they're famous for, actually doesn't come from the Yan people. It comes from the Cantonese, which are slightly, because when we talk about Chinese, effectively what we're talking about is the Han population of China. I mean, there are many ethnic groups, but it's the Cantonese people, which have somewhat been more dynamic I would say the Cantonese population have always been more dynamic in than the other sort of than the Han.
Is that the South Chinese AI?
That's the South Chinese. That's
Yeah.
the
So
area
it's the
around
people
Hong
who
Kong.
used to be, I was going to say, the people around Hong Kong and Macau. And,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
yeah.
It'd be those people. They've always been I think, and also, there have been times where China has you would have this sort of mandate of heaven, imperial state, and then it would collapse and invaded and then collapse again, and it would be some sort of chaotic and everything. But the Cantonese portion of China would be stable, pretty consistent, and also um, when they threw off foreign rulers, foreign yoke, like the Mongols, for example, it started in the Cantonese region. The
Yeah.
Han are
I've got to say, AI, when I joined the army in 1983, yes, I'm that old, there were guys in my battalion who'd served in Hong Kong, and I was always so envious of those guys because they had the best stories. Like
yeah,
the guys in my battalion that had served in two good places, well, two exotic places, which is the same thing, really. They'd served in Belize, and those guys had interesting stories. Because Belize is like a jungle Central American place. But the guys who had the best stories are the guys who served in Hong Kong. That was the one posting I wanted to do in the British Army in those days when Hong Kong was still British, of course.
Yeah.
And I was envious of those guys. I really was.
Yeah, because I was going to say, Macau was held by the Portuguese. The Portuguese governor, he basically said to Anson, I'm willing to give you supplies, but you need to get permission from the Chinese because, of course, this isn't the Chinese empire you have after the Opium Wars, where they're much weakened. Like, this is the Qing Empire at its almost zenith, I suppose you could say, although Emperor Qianlong, who was probably their best guy, I think he was dead by this point, or at least elderly. By this point, I'm trying to think of my dates, but I'm not too clued about Chinese history as of yet. But Canton, by the way, is Guangzhou nowadays in Chinese. And for example, I can recognize one part here where they had a military academy, which is where Chiang Kai-shek sets up shop and he builds up the army here. And this is where, really, in a way, you could say modern China, as you know it through the Kuomintang, I mean, later the communists. Although it's a bit weird, but long story short, this is kind of where modern China comes from, like the area around Guangzhou, like Whampoa Island. And yeah, you can see like the Pearl River here, which this is a famous river where, of course, the Opium War gets fought with a naval warfare. So,
although, as Adaman will tell you, and at some stage I'm going to do a stream with Adaman on this, we're going to talk about the Opium Wars, the so-called Opium Wars, which were not actually Opium Wars, but anyway, we'll talk about those.
Do you know what's on a side note, very quickly? When I was a few years ago, when I was working with it was actually a part-time stuff. I just left college, and it was with a company which had Chinese investors, and they came over, and it was a very funny story because it was during Remembrance services in November, and everyone was wearing on our suits, we were wearing poppies, right? The Chinese felt partially offended and weren't very happy because for them the sign of the poppy was, of course, in their mind, they thought it was a symbol of opium.
Yeah,
and
fuck them.
And the purpose of the story,
but AI, your old man who was RAF, he would have known guys who served in Hong Kong for sure.
Yeah. Oh no, we knew plenty, and he'd been there briefly, and as I say, not in the RAF context, just visiting, but he knew people plenty, and he applied there and he didn't get it, but because everyone wanted to go there. But the thing that was with the story is, I remember we explained, me and the other colleagues explained to them that no, this was at the time, this was what it means. And for them, they were obsessed with what they call the century of humiliation, or the era of humiliation, and where, I mean, it predates the Opium Wars, but I think for them, in their mind, it was, the mythology. And we talk about Boomer Truth. I mean, this is kind of like Chinese Boomer Truth, and you see this today, where the Han, sorry, not the Han, sorry, the Communist Party will say, well, under Xi Jinping, well, China will never be governed by and never be influenced by any foreign outsiders. But the problem is the Han, like the Indians, are a natural born slave, a natural born servant race of people.
All right. Let's get back to Anson, guys. So Anson, at this stage, he knows that the Philippines are Spanish, and that the Spanish treasure galleons that go from the coast of South America back to Spain, they stop off at the Philippines. And so he goes there to ambush a Spanish treasure galleon, basically.
This is June time, where the routine of the Acapulco to Manila galleon. So they stop up at the first, like the most eastern part of the Philippines, which is Cape Espiritu Santo. So this is where Anson lies in wait, because he knows a ship bearing silver and whatnot from Acapulco is coming in. Now, at this point, I suppose this is one of those moments where you think madness goes hand in hand with brilliance, because it could have gone massively wrong, because the crew had been massively atrophied and depleted by the last couple of years worth of voyage.
He had about 300 guys or so at this stage, Mitch, on the HMS Centurion.
Yeah, something like that.
I think it was 300 odd men, maybe 340, something like that. She didn't have even a full crew for a 60-gun ship, because don't forget, on a Royal Navy ship, you've got to man the guns as well as do all the sails and everything else. So she didn't really have a full crew even for a 60-gun ship. She had, I think it was less than 350 men on board at this stage.
Yeah. You have, as you get into June, you eventually get the Nuestra Senora de Covadonga coming in. Now, there were fears that there was going to be a second ship by the name of Pilar joining in, because the Spanish were aware that Anson was in the area, but for reasons I haven't really found out, Nuestra Senora was
probably Spanish inefficiency, because Spain.
Yeah.
The Spanish sailors were never not brave, but their navy, like their army, was just never efficient. It just wasn't, They were brave. They were brave, but they weren't particularly well trained, and they weren't, and the people who ran it weren't efficient. They just weren't.
I think there was an assumption from scouts, from reporting, that they knew the ship had been to Taiwan, it then went to Macau. I think there was this assumption that they were heading west and that there wasn't a direct threat.
It's also worth mentioning. Look, if you look at the thumbnail of this stream, which is HMS Centurion capturing this ship, and I think it's a better picture than that one, Mitch. And because what it does is it shows that HMS Centurion was actually about half the size of the Spanish ship. The Spanish ship was very well armed. It probably had more than 60 guns, actually. They might not have been such heavy guns, but they had probably more guns. And it was a much bigger ship than Anson's HMS Centurion was. So that comes into it as well. The Spanish think, okay, well, our ship's twice the size of this Royal Navy warship. Not a problem,
Yeah, so to now home up the reasons why HMS Centurion eventually won that 90-minute fight with the Spanish Galleon. So the fact was that the Centurion was a vessel built and fit for war. She carried 60 guns, 24 of them were 24-pounders. So against like a 3-decker ship of a day, they'd be screwed. But the 24-pounder cannons they had would it be adequate for the job dealing with Nuestra Senora. So Covadonga had 64 guns, but only 44 of them were actually usable because I think it was something like 20 of them were at the lowest deck, but because of the way the seas were, you couldn't actually use them. You had to close up both gun ports. So then you have like another 12. You have like another 12 guns that were not useful. So yeah, you just have 32 guns actually in open decks, and at best you've got 12-pound, which and it's also worth noting that when our ships got close, we especially used mainly canister shot plus swivel guns to rake down the top deck. So that was a big portion of the crew was just wiped out outright. And especially about 20 to 30 sharpshooters that Anson picked out for the express purpose of putting them on the mizzen and main masts to just bear down
up in the fighting tops, which are halfway up the mast, and then you can fire down onto the enemy deck. Yeah, absolutely right. Richard Hughes is correct, by the way. The Spanish built the Santissima Trinidad, which was a 4-decker ship of the line with over 130 guns that fought at the Battle of Trafalgar. But all the Royal Navy sailors said she sailed like a barn door. Whereas HMS Victory was noted as a first-rate, that was a good sailor. Santissima Trinidad, this gigantic Spanish warship, she was useless. It was very difficult to turn her even. She was huge. She was extremely powerful. But if she couldn't get her guns on you, wasn't much good. And she didn't do all that good at Trafalgar, let me tell you.
Yeah, so if you go to Shugborough, you can find coins where they were minted in 1741 or to 1740, and they were taken in 1743. As you can see here, you've got largely just have King Philip, King of India and Spain, because of course Spanish still claimed they were king of the Indies at that time. So and then you've got the captain of a ship was a Venetian by the name of Geronimo Montero, who surrendered his sword, and this is the sword they surrendered to Anson on that day.
Cool. It's worth pointing out, guys, when Anson captured this ship, the Nuestra Senora de Covadonga, she had 1,313,843 pieces of 8 on board.
Yeah, in today's money, that'll be 86 million. That'll be something like 86 million pounds.
I suspect even more than that, Mitch, with inflation, to be quite honest with you.
Wait, was it? I'm trying to think now. Was it 86 million? No, I actually got my numbers wrong. It's 86 million back
then. It might have been 86 billion, maybe. I don't know. It was a hell of a lot of money.
86 million back then. Sorry, I've got my numbers mixed up. Which was, it'd be something like £3.5 billion in today's money.
Let's explain this to the people watching this stream, either live or if you watch it later on. This was probably the single biggest prize money capture in Royal Navy history. And as we said earlier, Anson only had less than 350 blokes on his ship, HMS Centurion. The ordinary seaman, right? The lowest rank on a ship was the ship's boys. Then you had some landsmen, but landsmen didn't stay landsmen for long. They got rated ordinary fairly quickly. So basically, apart from a few young kids, the lowest rank on your ship was an ordinary seaman. Now, they were less common than able seamen. Able seamen were the guys who could go up the masts and put out the sails and all this kind of stuff, as well as man the guns and all this kind of thing, of course. The ordinary seaman on HMS Centurion got 20 years' pay in prize money. 20 years' pay.
I mean, you're semi-retired at that point.
No,
near
mate,
enough.
you're not semi-retired. You're totally retired, or you're opening a business if you got any sense. This is partly why all over Britain you will find British pubs called Anson or Admiral Anson or occasionally HMS Centurion. It's because they were opened by sailors from that ship.
Yeah, and there's pretty much so Anson got 20% of the spoils from being the captain, and then another 20% on top of that because he was a commanding commodore of his squadron.
Yeah, so he Anson becomes he becomes like Elon Musk straight away, and all of the officers become millionaires. And like I said, the ordinary seaman got 20 years' pay. The able seaman got about 26 years' pay. Just imagine if someone came up to you today, boys, and they said, "Right, I'm going to give you 20 or 25 years' pay in one lump of money." You could do almost anything you wanted, really. You know?
Yeah.
If you're sensible, I'm sure that some of those sailors just wasted that money. You know, it all went on grog and whores. But
yeah, it's worth noting.
Not all of them.
It's worth noting that of the 1,900 men who set off on this voyage, 183 of them survived. So you can imagine.
They've got. This is partly why they made so much money, because only a certain number of them made it back. But boy, if you made it back, you were a made man basically. If you had any common sense.
The risk is kind of for that time. That risk would be worth it. You know.
Well, yeah, you just go up to the ship and you say, "Yeah, I'm going to sign on, mate," and you could in the Royal Navy in those days.
Yeah,
and you come back and you get 20 years' pay, plus, of course, they would have got the 4 years' pay that they were owed by the Royal Navy because they probably weren't being paid very frequently on the voyage. So you know,
it's also another point is all of this is kind of mirroring what happened as said like 200 years earlier with Drake. Now, Drake had similar he ended up like looting and stealing a great deal of Spanish silver, gold, jewelry, even Spanish armor, a whole host. But he ran aground and he had to dump. I think he dumped some cannons and then he had to dump some of the treasure as well.
Yeah, people are still looking for it anyway.
Yeah, still looking for it, and but even with the amount he dumped, which was quite a lot, he was able to return to England in a similar fashion. But this was probably even. I mean, it was, as you said, it was greater than what Sir Francis was able to achieve.
Yeah, I think it was the biggest single prize money capture the Royal Navy ever got. And incidentally, Anson got another one later on. Later on in his career, he captured another, I think it was a Spanish ship, but it could have been French, and he made £300,000 from that.
Yeah. Now, I was saying, did the Anson family, this obviously before the Revolution was, did they own any land in the Carolinas or Georgia at all?
Mitch, that's for you, mate. I don't know enough about that.
Do you know? Because there's a few places in Georgia and Carolina named after him. I was just wondering if he was like a. I mean,
I don't know for certain, but I mean, I imagine because he did spend a fair while there, and also another thing. I thought it was 3.6 billion. Actually, no, it turns out. So if you convert 86 million pounds from the prize money,
it's a lot.
And that's 1743 money. So when you put that in today's money, you're talking like 20 billion pounds.
Yeah, bear in
Jesus.
mind, guys, 100 years after this, right, in the 1840s, right, 100 years after this, a loaf of bread was a farthing, which is a quarter of a penny. Yeah, a beer was half a penny, maybe. And that was 100 years after this. Okay,
I can see why the Spanish
yeah.
crown was so pissed off. Why they
Oh,
called us devils and
immensely.
pirates. Yeah,
yeah.
I can see why they were very angry with this.
But can you imagine how many recruits it got for the Royal Navy? I mean, you see this guy just got 24 years pay. Fuck.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Because that's the thing,
I
George
d-
Anson. Like George Anson was like a second or third son, so you imagine he wasn't expected to inherit anything from his father, and then he goes and joins the Royal Navy and does this. Like you can imagine, yeah, many lads from his social background would have joined.
Well, you see, it was a bankroll. His brother Thomas's, political career. He's able to do a great deal with the funds. What's quite interesting, Duke, though, as you mentioned it, is because, of course, a few decades later, of course, you'd have Captain Cook's thing, and it's actually mentioned in the book that I was used to reference right at the beginning that there was no short number of recruits because a big part. This wasn't Cook, but it was more like the Navy at large. The way that they would get,
especially frigate captains and people like this, yes,
they would basically, invoke the adventure of Anson and his crew, and it was like, even 30, 40 years later, near enough, people, it would be like.
But they'd sometimes do
treasures.
it. They'd sometimes do it too. If you joined Captain Cochrane's ship, for example, in the Napoleonic Wars, you could become quite a rich bloke as an able seaman because of the number of prizes he captured. And Cochrane, by the way, is the bloke who Jack Aubrey is largely based off of in the novels. And he captured so many French and Spanish prizes in his time that, yeah, as an able seaman, all right, you're not going to make 25 years pay. That was very exceptional. But you might make 10 years pay from prize money. And this is why good frigate captains, particularly, because frigates got cruises rather than doing blockade duty, frigate captains didn't have to use the press gang and all this. They got volunteers because you could make quite a lot of money if you were with a good captain on a good ship. Prize money was very important in the Royal Navy.
Yeah, I imagine certain captains, like I imagine if you were a surviving crew member, because one thing worth bearing in mind is that the guys who did survive scurvy on board HMS Centurion, a lot of them disproportionately were younger. Like you're talking like guys in their early 20s and younger. Like,
Yeah,
for example,
they would have been the younger, fitter guys, 100%. Yeah.
So you imagine like you're a 12-year-old midshipman and you get like so much money from taking that ship.
Yeah, and also bear in mind, guys, I'm saying ordinary seamen got 20 years' wages, plus their back pay from the Navy. So probably 24 years' wages. Most of the seamen would have been able seamen, but then you've got all the petty officers who would have got far more than that. You're talking about probably 30 years' pay, 35 years' pay. And then, of course, all the, like the surgeon and the officers and those guys, they would have got even more. So this ship got a literal shower of gold thrown over it, basically. And every man aboard it was like Richard Croesus when they got back to England.
Yeah. And
I would be just asking about the Saxon Horde. I mean, I was found in Lichfield. That was like a random farmer just found in his field nearby Lichfield. So, I mean, I think it's pretty much like I can't remember who said it, but someone always said you're never more than like 100 meters away from like just finding something big in Britain. I can't remember who said it.
Well, there's certainly a lot of buried treasure in Britain because we have so much history and it's such an old country. All right, guys, to finish this up, because we've been going almost an hour and 3/4, can we talk about Anson? After this, of course, he's loaded with, because the Treasury makes money out of this as well, of course, in Britain, the government. And he's loaded with honors and all the rest of it. And he eventually becomes the first Sea Lord. He becomes the professional head of the Navy. And what Anson spends his time doing when he does is rooting out corruption from the Royal Navy, in increasing the amount of support for sick and wounded sailors, ordinary sailors. He spends a lot of effort on that. Like the Royal Hospital at Greenwich a lot of that is Anson. It was started before him, but he makes it a much better organization. And he also, Anson will take, if any captain or admiral recommends to him someone be promoted, he will take that. When a politician recommends anyone should be promoted, Anson says, no, not doing it, mate. Which is a very sensible thing for a sailor, a Royal Navy officer to do. And he just says no. He says, if it's a politician, he says, no, I'm not interested in helping out your political family. But if a captain or an admiral says to him, oh, this master's mate or this lieutenant should be promoted, Anson will almost always say yes. Okay.
Yeah, because one thing, and also is like it brings in naval uniforms, because when they were in China doing negotiations with local mandarins in Canton, they're having to use a regimental uniform from those dead Marines because they've got
100. Sorry, Mitch. Thank you for reminding me about that. Yeah, it's Admiral. It's Anson when he's an admiral who brings in the uniforms for officers. Uniforms for sailors only really come in the early 19th century. Although by Nelson's time, the captains of ships are giving their men uniforms, but that's the captains of the ships. But Anson is the bloke who brings in uniforms for Royal Navy officers so that people can see they are officers of the crown, basically.
Yeah, because the thing was, of course, because the Chinese are very much big on formality, so not having a uniform when addressing them. Well, the Chinese will interpret that as an insult because they believe because Chinese, of course, they believe they're a middle kingdom. So if you don't, if you don't resort to the same level of formality as they do, they'll interpret that as an insult. So in a way, it's kind of necessity for nothing else. And it's kind of funny how Anson's brief time with the Chinese, because those interactions he had with them were recorded, and they reckon you can make an argument that Anson's interactions with them were like sort of a foreshadowing of what would happen 100 years later when we go to war with the Chinese twice or thrice if you count the boxing.
Yeah, but this. Sorry, not to go on a sort of another anti-Chinese rant about this, but when he encountered them, they hadn't changed from like their medieval state. They hadn't really even like changed the society from 1,000 years earlier, really.
Yeah. The guy who was writing that book, he said, he kept mentioning every time he says like Chinese, because he was talking about the fortifications around Canton, and he said they were pretty bad, like because they were based upon like, well, it's inferior to the star forts you would have in the 17th century or fortresses in the 16th century. Like, that's how bad they were compared to our fortresses of the time. So, like he was saying, like even this writer was saying hypothetically, a British ship by itself could take over Canton because the Chinese fleet is.
Well, the Chinese invented gunpowder, but then used it for fireworks. So.
Yeah, but the Chinese gunpowder was absolutely crap. The Chinese gunpowder was absolutely crap compared to ours, so it's not really much of a fair. It's not.
Well, British gunpowder was the best in the world, but we spoken about this on other
But
streams.
the thing there is, like,
Anyway, sorry, I just want to say, when Anson becomes the first Sea Lord, the professional head of the Royal Navy, he does a great deal to make sure that no one ever sends off another Anson expedition as poorly prepared as his. And this is why in the 7 Years' War, what the Americans call the French and Indian Wars, the Royal Navy does so very well. And it's why people like Captain Cook can go on years-long voyages around the world and lose hardly anyone from scurvy. It's because of the work that Anson did.
And Britain dominates the sea as well. They just dominate the sea. It's also worth noting that Anson also created the squadron at Devonport in Plymouth to patrol the Channel, the English Channel, as well. That was one of his a permanent squadron.
Yeah, I think the only other form of, I don't know too much detail, but he changes the logistics as well, the Royal Navy, because one thing he also makes sure that, like what happened with his voyage, you're not going to get anything like the South Sea Company forcing a Royal Navy fleet to have loads of supplies.
No, he really goes against corruption in the Royal Navy, against jobbing and backhanders and all that shit. He works very hard against all those things, and he is one of the guys in the 1840s and 1850s who makes the Royal Navy the professional force which is going to dominate the world's oceans for the next 150 years. It's this chap Anson. He was a good bloke. He was a really good bloke.
Yeah,
and there was a reason why Captain Cook, on his voyage, while the Admiralty were hell bent on not allowing the Royal Society to run roughshod over them because of the legacy of the South Sea debacle. And it's why the Admiralty was like, no, if we're going to do this, everything's going to be done from the Admiralty, from the Navy, all in-house. You're not going to have like this sort of nepotistic level of corruption outside. And we talk about royal charters. The empire was built on royal charters, and some would, like, you take the Hudson Bay Company, the Virginia Company, or the East India Company, these great ones. A lot of them were good. A lot of them were great people, quite dynamic thinking people. Some of them, though, were terrible, were really a detriment to Britain and British interests. And that was something that's true. And as I said, the South Sea one was one of those. They just weren't good. They were incredibly corrupt, and probably contributed to a lot of the smuggling that went on as well in the that the Royal Navy had to then sort out later on down the line.
Absolutely. I'd also say that Anson's hair in that painting, is it by Reynolds? I think it's Joshua Reynolds. I'm not sure. But his hair in that painting is a wig, guys. Guys used to wear wigs in those days if you were posh.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Back then, people's hair, particularly men's, it'd either be, balding terribly or very, very, like, poor quality.
But the guys cut it off and they wore wigs. I mean, whatever.
Yes.
They cut it short, I should say. But
it's only like the 1780s or 1790s when that gets jettisoned and people just stop wearing those wigs. But yeah, with the exception of courts where you still have to wear them, you don't really get
it was a bit the wig stuff was a bit continental. It was quite French, Austrian courts. I think it was the Austrian court that sort of like really amplified it. But anyway, that's a separate matter. But yeah.
But I mean, it's also true in the later 18th century. After this, sailors sometimes did, even officers did wear their hair long, and put a ribbon in it at the back or something like that. But that had pretty much died out by Nelson's era.
Yeah. I know that the only other reforms, which I don't know too much in depth about, but I don't know if it'll be a subject for another stream, perhaps. But,
He reformed the Royal Hospital at Greenwich.
because I was going to say
and-
about, because he
yeah.
also brings in he changes the tactics up a bit to allow for more close-up combat. So you think of like Nelson at Trafalgar, where he gets close up to deal a right broadswords. Because usually what used to happen was you'd have like ships lining up parallel to one another, trading broadsides, which is a lot more indecisive compared to what Nelson would later do at Trafalgar, for example. But like,
Oh yeah, for sure.
yeah, and also another thing is because frigates, for example, I believe they were starting to be adopted, but Anson really sponsors them because he favours a more aggressive, tactical overview when it comes to heavy Royal Navy wages battles against the French, which is why, for example, because people talk about, because I mean, we're talking about Robert Clive, and you and AI have talked about James Wolfe in Canada. But the decisive battle of the 7 Years' War has to be Quiberon Bay, because that's really where the French, whatever chances they had of keeping the sea lanes open between India, North America, and France, were gone, and it just becomes a position where
the Royal Navy just dominates the ocean.
Yeah.
At that point.
Anson did brief William Pitt on attacking French colonies, particularly with the plan of seas capturing, Canada, as well as attacking Senegal and Guadeloupe, and bearing in mind, as we know, that particularly with Canada, that was the from that conflict, that was the main gain for Britain and a massive loss for France. And again, a lot of
that and Clive in India, of course. But yeah,
for particularly that planning came from good defense at home, and planning again came from Anson.
It's also worth mentioning that Anson, who was like the admiral of the fleet at this stage, one of his officers resigned his commission largely over a misunderstanding of a message he was sent. And Anson, very late in his life, he would have been like late 60s or early 70s, he went to sea again on his flagship and commanded a fleet again. He was a Chad, was Anson.
Yeah, but I was like, because I'm trying to think. Yeah, because he was born 69 or so. I'm thinking, yeah, but I'll be during the 7 Years' War. It didn't really see much action, but nevertheless, he did keep Britain safe as a sort.
Yeah, but he went to sea again, is what I'm saying. Like, he was the first Lord of the Admiralty, the first Sea Lord in charge of the Royal Navy. And when one of the admirals resigned, he just said, "Okay, I'll take over." He was a Chad. He was a really good British guy who we should remember as a hero. And it's worth pointing out that I think 8 Royal Navy ships have been named after George Anson. In World War II, it was a battleship. In World War II, it was a battleship. Yeah, the battleship HMS Anson, which fought against the Japanese with the British Pacific Fleet in the Far East. And also today, there's still a HMS Anson, who is a SSN hunter-killer submarine. So we still got an Anson in the Royal Navy, and we don't have much of a Royal Navy left, sadly, anymore. But we used to have, and there's still an Anson.
The Anson, by the way, he did have estates in the Carolinas, in North Carolina, and there's a county to this day named after him, Anson County, and there's a monument in the city of Wadesboro, which is his capital. And outside the courthouse, there is a statue of Anson, as well as right next to him a monument to the
Oh,
Confederacy.
uh, uh, sorry. Yeah. Just noticed. Yeah, I just noticed there's a small error. I thought his wife's name was Sarah York. I'm thinking of someone else's wife's Elizabeth, but I did get the father right. He was the Lord Chancellor, Earl Hardwick, who.
And
yeah.
a bit of a bizarre one as well, Duke. That there was a regiment from the revolutionary, army. I think it was the militia, and they were known as the Anson Regiment as well, which is a bit of a weird one. But yeah, there you go.
Well, there we go, guys. This is the story of George Anson, a great Englishman, a hero. You can see this memorial to him that Mitch has put up at the moment. He was a great British hero, and you'll never read about him in a British school anymore. Most people have never heard of him. Like I said, he took the single richest prize in Royal Navy history, and his ordinary seaman made up more than 20 years' pay. For fuck's sake, that's a Chad, if you ask me. But whatever.
Yeah, I can't think of I can't think of much else to say, so I'll pass over to Ayo.
If we were all of us here in chat, if we were all to meet up, I could rent a boat. We could sail over to Spain and start we could start robbing for gold and then reuse it to rebuild the Royal Navy.
In Minecraft. YouTube.
Yeah.
In Minecraft YouTube. But yeah. Listen, guys.
That's a joke.
I think I know that, mate. But YouTube has no sense of humor.
It's a
lefty
joke.
liberals. Lefty liberals have no sense of humor, mate.
It's a joke in the sense of Spain's got any fucking money.
Well, yeah, exactly. They've no money anyway, but they're tax and spend just like Britain is these days. But yeah, but
I know some Spaniard will find you said that and then come into Juice comments saying we stole all their money.
Good. I hope we did.
Yeah, I would say there's only I just remembered there's only 3 British captains who actually took what they call the prize of the oceans, i.e. the Spanish treasure ship. Cavendish in 1586.
Yep.
A guy called Noakes, I think his name was 1709, and then Anson. Yeah.
The ultimate thing you could do.
Hang on though, Mitch. There were 4 Royal Navy frigate captains who did actually capture a Spanish treasure fleet, which the Spanish at this time sent in frigates. But the Royal Navy frigates were obviously just better because they were Royal Navy frigates with British sailors. And they captured it. But the government did them out of the money because they said, the war hadn't actually been declared for 3 days or some shit like that.
I mean,
so they only got a tiny bit of the money they should have got. And that was in I'm not sure if it was the Revolutionary Wars or the early Napoleonic Wars. But yeah, it was a con job by the British government. The Treasury kept nearly all of it. And the sailors got a little bit, but it wasn't much. And it should have been huge amounts of money. And they actually had to fight really hard because it was 4 Royal Navy frigates that were smaller than the 4 Spanish frigates that they defeated.
Yeah, I hope if we ever do have a sort of intergalactic empire, can you imagine like they'll just like have like space frigates and spaceships where they'll just put posters saying if you fight for the I don't know Royal Navy here, and if you take an enemy ship, you get X amount of money.
Well, officially,
yeah.
prize money was only got rid of for the Royal Navy, I think. I think it was in World War II, actually. But you didn't get much in World War One, for example, because most of the ships you were fighting were warships, and they didn't have much money on them. It's also worth pointing out something else. When Anson captured that treasure galleon, he took it back to Taiwan, and she had a lot of other goods in her that were not money. And he sold all that to the Chinese merchants, and he distributed that to his crew too. So they made money on that as well. But anyway,
I imagine his men probably loved him in the same way Caesar's legions loved him, I suppose.
yeah, I would have thought so.
The ultimate like mogging, as the kids call it, mogging, would be that you basically take Spanish gold, you basically have like this massive like 20-year pay packet, and then you just like use it like in a Spanish brothel or something. It'd be like the ultimate form of mogging to wind up the Spanish.
Could be. Gentlemen, could I ask Mitch and AI to please plug their channels while I go to the loo?
Yeah, I got Mitch History channel where I did show the stream on my channel, so I imagine some people will find it here. I've not got much to say. I mean, I'm 2 weeks on Fridays. On the 3rd of July, I'm going to do a stream about Battle of Gettysburg, and then I think in July I'm going to do a couple of streams about the Japanese, like the Imperial Japanese Army, Japanese Navy. After that, I might do a couple of streams on East Germany, and I know you've got an interest in East Germany, so you'll be invited on about AI if you like.
Yeah, I've got an old stream of East Germany on my channel, which with from a few years ago. Who was it with? Let me just try. I think it was Cringe Walker, and it I remember it really angered. Who was it? There was some guy who got really triggered about it. I think it was like some boomer MAGA fella, and he got really triggered by the way that it was because it was kind of like saying actually East Germany was like a more true German state than West Germany was. Like West Germany was just total Americana, imperialism and everything else. So yeah, quite good. So that'd be quite an interesting one to look at, particularly Honecker as well. It's quite an interesting character.
Yeah, because I'll do one stream about the Stasi and then one stream about. I'll probably just do like one old catch-all stream about East Germany, which I would say when you look up because you can find like videos of like the East German army doing like these old Prussian military tunes, which you don't really see the West German army doing anywhere near.
No, they did like an old dressage as well of like Prussian. They did a celebration of Prussian history, and this is at a time when in West Germany, to even talk about Prussia in a positive sense was basically like, I mean, they were so. It's crazy how guilt-ridden in West Germany they all were compared to the East. The East were like, boots strapped and like in Prussian marching mode, and the West Germans were just like, "Oh, love me a McDonald's" and shit like that. It's disgraceful in some ways. Of course, we all know the meme. When the wall was coming down, and you had the West Germans trying to shake the hand of these like really well dressed East German guards, and they're just refusing to shake the hand. That's kind of, it does encapsulate like those two societies where, yeah, you have like free market and you can eat at many restaurants and listen to music and go to gay clubs and all that sort of shit. But then at the same time, East Germany's there and it's really German. But the thing that it's not.
Well, I mean, it's worth pointing out that in modern Germany, it's the former East German bit which is the more based.
Yeah, I mean, there was a Catholic cardinal who I can't fully quote on here, but this was like in his prediction 1940. He said that if the Bolsheviks were to win, it would be tyranny, and it would basically the countries would be broken up and they would be ruled as mini communist regimes, and it would just be brutal and that. And then in the West, if the West were to win and dominate, then Freemasons and the small hats would end up ruling over the West. And but there was the other quote that I think it was, I remember Bowden. I think I think it came from Evola or something like that. But it was the communism rots the body, but liberalism rots the soul. And in West Germany, the soul was
and the brain. But
yeah, but effectively the soul was rotted in the West, in West Germany, but the body was rotting in the East. Because East Germany, on paper, if you look at it, East Germany was a very miserable, a quite impoverished Soviet satellite republic. Yes, GDP was higher, as people mentioned, in the West. Yes, it was, but at what cost? Because it wasn't Germany. It was this social experiment where they all hated each other, and they were all like into, the worst excesses.
And they imported the third world and became the third world, just like Britain.
They imported many Turks. They imported in the, what was it, 60s and 70s. They imported many Turks.
Because the thing was, originally it was meant to be the Italians and the Yugoslavs, and they were like a good deal because they went home once the contracts were done. But then JFK forced the Germans, West Germans, to accept loads of Turks to get better.
And they did not go home, surprisingly enough.
No.
AI, have you plugged your channel yet, mate?
Not yet. In a couple weeks, I'm going to be doing a stream on the Northern Crusades, the Prussian Crusades, to be exact. The Prussian Crusades, the formation of the Teutonic state, keeping the with Mitch's like Prussian-esque theme. I'm going to have a special guest. I'll announce it now. I'm going to have Apostolic Majesty on.
Cool.
For that one, because I don't know about you guys, but I was asking around, and it's quite. There's not that many people that know the Prussian Crusade or the Teutonic formation.
There won't be many. And Apostolic Majesty is excellent. I'm a big fan. So good luck. That'll be good.
That's what
I shall look forward to that. AI.
Yeah, and there's a few. I say there's only really a handful of books out there, but if people want to read up on it, look up the 11th century Polish Chronicle, and there's a lot of good information about the old Prussians raiding and what triggered the response from Conrad of Moldavia to call upon the Teutonic Order to trigger that. So if people want to find out more about that, look up that. But there are other books online. There's one by a Scandinavian chap whose name's forget me, but he's quite good. He actually does on the Northern Crusades. He's quite good as well. So.
Okay, and there will be links to Mitch and AI's channel in a comment pinned comment under the stream later on. Guys, please like the stream if you haven't already. And as I said earlier, you can support our content if you like it via StreamYards, which is in the description of this video. And it's also pinned at the bottom of the chat. We will be back on Saturday, and I can tell you two things we're going to be talking about on Saturday, one of which will interest AI. Well, actually, I'm sure both of them will interest AI, but one of them is in his part of the world. Some greenies want to kill most of the Dartmoor ponies, which I think everyone on my stream is going to be against, because Dartmoor ponies are a damn sight more British than any Pakistani or Somalian. And I like horses, and I don't like Pakistanis or Somalians. But anyway, yeah. So I was happy to see, guys, that Tom Rousel, Survived the Jive, actually liked my post on this and said that he agreed that and he comes from that part of the world too. He's also in the southwest, and he says he doesn't think the Dartmoor ponies ought to, they want to kill about 90% of them, basically.
Yeah, like the reason they're giving is something about apparently they're crapping all over Dartmoor, and I'm like, that's a really big reason. Like, I'm sorry, like I mean, Cannock Chase gets a lot of horse crap all over it, but no one complains because the flies eat it.
Yeah, they're trying to say there's not enough wildflowers and this, that, and the other shit. It's just typical greeny crap, basically.
Yeah, but
I'm sorry. I like ponies. They're nice. I want to see them.
It doesn't make sense though, because Dartmoor doesn't have flowers. I mean, I read the reason. Like, if you go to Dartmoor, it has brush. It has things you see on moors. It doesn't have flowers. It doesn't have trees.
Well,
it has
all they need to do, AI, all they would need to do, if this is true, right, is to fence off, I don't know, 50 acres of Dartmoor and just let the plants grow. And if all these flowers are going to come up, they'll come up there, won't they?
Like, isn't the whole point of Dartmoor that it's meant to be like, it's almost like
it's a moor. It's a moor.
Because there's a prism, which is really hard to escape from. Because even if you were to successfully escape, well, where are you going to escape to? The nearest settlement.
All the farms, because they go into lockdown. There was my parents remember the last escape, that the one chap, he managed to outrun the dogs and get to the main road where a car was waiting for him. That was the only, I think that's only only twice there's been a successful escape. One chap was, I think, perished in the moor. He actually fell into a bog.
Is it from the prison you're talking about? Yeah,
the prison. Yeah, the prison.
Anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about that, but I can tell you Saturday stream is mostly going to be about the Rupert Lowe Restore Britain rape gang report, which I started reading last night, and I haven't slept as a consequence because it's so horrifying. I've put it up all over my social media. I think every single British person, man and woman, needs to read it.
I don't know if anyone saw that Donna Rachel woman on Twitter, like the reaction. She's that woman who's almost cackling, like going saying,
the one who's got eyes like a shark. Yeah, I saw her.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about that one was she was a reform councillor. Then she got chucked out because she said she was joining Rupert Lowe's party, and then now she's just independent all over again, and now she's just. And now it turns out she's been paid by reform, so it's really all over the place with that woman. Plus, also, she's Jewish.
Oh, early life history! What a surprise! Look, guys. So if
she's been sticking her nose into where it doesn't belong.
What a surprise! What a surprise! What a surprise!
No pun intended.
So. Yeah, I get you, man. If you're interested in this stuff, we're going to be talking about, like I said, we are going to talk a little bit about the Dartmoor ponies, because I think they're more British than any Pakistani or Somalian. People are saying, and I don't know if this is true, but people are saying Dartmoor ponies have been in Britain since the Bronze Age. What I will say is they look very like the sort of ponies that would have been drawing Boadicea's chariot when the Romans were in Britain.
Yeah,
They look
I think
very like those sort of small horses.
I think horses were only introduced in the Bronze Age as well, so they're pretty much as old as like the first horses that came up here because you have factor
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I don't know how old they are, Mitch. But and Tom Rousel said this. He's not sure how old they are. Although, if I know anything about Tom Rousel, Survive the Jive, he'll probably look it up and see. But I know he's very into the horse culture story, which came across with those people.
Yeah, because it's like you have a legendary white horse of Kent, which is the same white horse that the northern Saxon parts of Germany have as their flag as well.
Yeah.
There's also
I got a book. Sorry to interrupt. I actually just picked a book. I got a book on Dartmoor history. It says here that the earliest horse remains found on Dartmoor that match the breed date back to 3,500 BC.
Well, yeah, that's before the belt. That's before the belt beakers. Then that's a
that's before the Romans for sure. Yeah.
You're going back to Neolithic farmers.
Yeah, Neolithic. Yeah, that's right. And wild horses, and this was when they started to be domesticated.
Well, like I said, Dartmoor ponies are a damn sight more British than any Pakistani and Somalian, and they're also a lot cuter. So, you know.
Yeah. And the Romans, by the way, wrote about the wild horses on Dartmoor. The Anglo-Saxons wrote about it. In fact, they were so popular that some of the heraldry and banners of horses would be the white horse. Yeah, as someone would probably be inspired along with wild horses. And even the Normans, when they came across, they tried to domesticate them. Didn't really work out well. They've been here, I mean, longer than the civilization itself. And I'm going to be absolutely straight with you. They are more value than any sort of sub foreigner,
third world.
Yeah, because
economic migrant. Yeah, I agree.
These fuckers breed like rabbits anyway. I mean, quite frankly, a million could be end tomorrow, and I wouldn't care. And it wouldn't damage the population.
The interesting thing about the Dartmoor ponies, AI, as you pointed out to me on the Discord, is they're all owned by somebody these days. And what the greenies of something like Ecological England or some stupid name like that, it's a Quango, what they want to do is to pay the owners to kill them, basically. And they want to kill between 75 and 90% of them.
Yeah, there's only like 3,000 of them. I know one thing Americans will find interesting is apparently horses, they originated in North America and then they went over to Europe, but then they died off in North America.
Yes.
And so we had to reintroduce them.
Yeah, like all the American Mustangs are really originally from Spanish horses. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What's kind of bizarre is that the population of Dartmoor ponies have actually gone down.
Yeah.
The last 100 years.
They've been cut repeatedly, but these idiot moronic greenies who don't they want to get rid of 90% of the sheep as well. AI from Dartmoor. They want all the livestock gone because they're just fanatics and evil people. Basically, they're evil people as far as I'm concerned. They just are. I mean, Britain is a dog and horse-loving nation, and I'll keep our dogs and our horses, and especially all the local breeds, much more than I will third world migrants or greenies.
I'm going to go down to like the local. The military will be this week. They'll be training on Dartmoor. I'm just going to go down there. I'm going to walk up. I'll say, can you take me to your CO? I'll walk in the tent and I'll just have a letter saying, listen, I request. I basically request you to instigate an insurrection at this point. I just overthrow the government. Come on, let's do it.
I wish. I wished.
Yeah.
But as I said, most of the weekend stream, we're going to be talking about the Red Gang report and the truths that it tells about little British girls as young as 11 years old being you're not supposed to say essayed on YouTube. You can get banned for that for some reason. But they weren't just essayed. They were mentally and physically tortured by these foreigners, which is all I will say. But we will have words about that because people in my Discord are reading that report as we speak.
I don't know if it's breaking. This is like breaking news, but Natural England Southwest Region.
That's who we're talking about. Yep.
He's come out this evening and said that the statement made that they're planning on culling 90% of ponies Dartmoor. He just said this is not true. Natural England has not recommended the cull of Dartmoor ponies. We do not have the power to order a cull, and we have no and not been advised to, and have no ambition to do so.
Well, what I heard, and I didn't see this from one source because I don't do things from one source. I saw it from about 5 sources. It wasn't just Natural England. It was also a government organization who advised. Natural England advised this government organization. So there could be a bit of weasel words in there, AI, if you know what I mean.
It was put to him, so that whoever interviewed him said, it says here, a claim has been brought saying it could be as soon as autumn. And the director responded, there is no date for any culls. We do not recommend one. And he's come out and said that.
Well, good. If that's true, good.
He is saying here, clear as day, it's not true.
Well, good. If that's true, maybe this little bit of publicity that started up has killed it at the root. I hope so.
It could be. I bet you probably it was a policy. It was like a
someone was
suggestion.
Thinking about it.
And someone decided to leak it to basically prevent it from gaining any traction internally.
And, like Countryside Sports put it out there, AI, and you all know as well as I do, this is the hunting, shooting, and fishing types, and they put it out, and they don't normally put out stuff which is bullshit.
I mean, the thing though is, like, just think about the optics. You're going to have these very nice little ponies.
Oh yeah,
you're just going to be driving through it, and you're going to have like some government quango with a fucking rifle just executing.
They do it in Australia.
AI,
they do it in Australia. Let me tell you, like the wild horses in Australia, which are the Australian equivalent to Mustangs in America, are called Brumbies. Yeah, and every so often, some nutcase greenie will decide, no, we've got to cull these guys, and the government or the state government will pay guys to go out in helicopters and shoot them. And of course, as soon as that happens, the public will get up in arms because people don't like you shooting horses because horses are nice. You know, horses are not dangerous. They're nice animals, you know. But this happens all the time in Australia. And these nutcase greenies who basically would like to kill all the people as well, that's what they're into, you know. Don't want dogs, don't want horses, don't want any domestic animals. Everyone should starve to death every winter, you know, that sort of thing. But yeah, true. We've lost Mitch. Thank you, Mitch, for coming on the stream and for suggesting this stream, which I think was a good one. Do look up Admiral George Anson. He's a good British hero who is not well enough remembered these days. Thank you to AI for joining me. And we'll see you on Saturday when mostly we're going to be talking about this rape gang report, which I would urge everyone to read. If you go on X, Rupert Lowe and other people have put it on there. You can download it and read it for yourself. And if you're British, you should.
Right. Good night, everyone.